Auditing SQL Server. So auditing gives us the ability to find out who's doing what and what they're doing it to on our SQL Server. So it could be anything from logging connection attempts to our SQL Server all the way down to the super granular level of finding out what object people are accessing, especially if we have sensitive objects, say like a sensitive table that's going to contain payroll information, social security information, credit card information. That's the type of table we could put auditing on, all the way down to the select level. To anybody that ever submits a read statement against that table, we will log exactly who did it and what statement they submitted. Checking out our Nugget overview, we're going to kick things off with a look at auditing and just get familiar with the terminology, the process, the objects and layers involved with auditing, and more importantly, talk about what are we going to audit. And as I mentioned, sensitive information and sensitive objects are great candidates for auditing, but also what we call elevated privileges. And these are the people at the top of the access list in SQL Server. We're talking about our DBAs ourselves, and even our developers and certain power users that have access to a wide array of features and objects and everything in SQL Server. We need to audit these people because if any of them were to turn to the dark side and do something malicious, we need to know what they did, when they did it, and how they did it. We'll also get familiar with policy-based management in our overview, talk about everything from facets to conditions to policies, and get familiar with what policy-based management is good for, which is enforcing configuration standards across our instances and across our enterprise. And I remember when policy-based management came out in SQL 2008, it was like liquid awesome. It was really that cool because it really was painful trying to enforce configuration standards across multiple instances and without doing it in a nice centralized consistent way. You just had to go and have good documentation and hope for the best, really. Now with policy based management, we have a nice centralized place to control all the settings and virtually everything, anything we can think of here in SQL Server. So we'll get a good overview here of what policy based management is all about, and then we'll jump over to the virtual Nugget Lab and put all this stuff to use. We'll start with how to configure a server audit and how to create what's called a target, which is really just where are we going to log the information to? The Windows event log? Are we going to log it to a log file somewhere? And talk about some server level configuration stuff there. And also, I'll show you how you can log connections, both success and failures, coming into SQL Server. From there, we'll take a look at how to audit actions. So we'll do this at both the instance and the database level, figure out what we want to audit, and then we'll write some statements that'll fire off the audit, and we'll see exactly what information is logged. From there, we'll take a look at how to work with policy-based management. We'll learn how to create conditions, how to create policies, how to enforce and evaluate those policies on the local instance, and then I'll show you how to set up a central management server and register other instances with it so we can enforce our policies across all the instances in our enterprise. Really neat stuff there. So let's start with how all this stuff works on paper, and then we'll jump into the virtual Nugget Lab and get familiar with how it works in SQL Server. So auditing, as I mentioned, allows us to log user actions, and really principal actions is the right word because it could be anything from a user to a group to a role in SQL Server. So anything that somebody can be a part of, we can log exactly what they did, when they did it, what they did it to, and we can do it at the instance level, which if we do things at the instance level and it applies to a database, it'll apply to every database at the instance. If we have enterprise edition, we can do it at the actual database level itself, which gives us much more granular control over what we're auditing. Now, when it comes time to actually do the logging, SQL Server gives us a couple of options. We can log it to a file, we can log it to the security event log or the application event log. And if you do one of the event logs, keep in mind the security event log, only people with elevated privileges are going to be able to read this event log. And in fact, in order for SQL Server to log to the security event log, we need to jump through a few hoops in order to make that happen. So we need to go into the local security policy of the system and make sure SQL Server's service accounts have access to write to the security log. So I'll show you how to set that up. The application event log doesn't have the requirements that the security log does because it's wide open. Anybody can read from the application event log. So that's why when you're auditing specific actions, be careful of where you put it. If you're going to log sensitive objects and stuff, you may not want to put it in the application log. You may want to put it in a secure file that's in a secure location. And that goes well with what we're going to monitor for. The big one here is going to be elevated privileges. Again, we have power users, we have developers, we have DBAs who are going to have some pretty impressive access to our system and the objects within it. So we need to monitor those individuals, and Microsoft recommends that we log that information to a file that is secure and that they do not have access to, because then they cannot tamper or spoof exactly what they're doing in the system. So it's a good idea to do that. And also make sure if you're going to write to a log file that the service accounts for SQL Server has permission to write to that file, especially if that file is located on a network directory, which you will probably do if you're logging elevated privileges in your audits. Also good for connection attempts, unsolicited or otherwise, we can find out who's hitting our SQL Server. And as I mentioned, sensitive objects and sensitive data are great for auditing targets. So how auditing works is pretty simple. The first thing we need to set up is what's called a server audit. And a server audit is really just a configuration point for where we're going to log it to. And there's some other things around here I'll show you when we get there. Then it comes time to set up what's called the server audit specification or the database audit specification. So when we set these up, we tie them to an actual server audit, which is going to specify the target that the data flows to. The rest of it just comes down to what are we going to log? What actions do we want to log? At the instance level or the database level, there's a ton of options that we can choose from. We can log everything from backups to statements to executing stored procedures to modifications of objects to modification of data. You name it, there's something in these audit specifications that we can use to audit. So when we get over to the Nugget Lab, I'll give you some good examples of all of these, how to monitor elevated privileges, unsolicited connections attempts, and work with sensitive objects. Now, moving on to policy-based management, it gives us a great way to enforce configuration standards. We have at our disposal what are called facets. And facets are just a collection of properties for an object. So think of the database as being an object. And the facets of an object would be all the properties. So if you right click on a database and go to properties, all those settings, auto close, auto shrink, auto create statistics, the recovery model, all that stuff is available and at our disposal. And I'll show you when we open up a facet, we get all of the configurable properties in it and a nice little description of what that property is. Conditions are going to be the values that we want to enforce on the properties of our facets. So let's say we have a database facet and we have an auto shrink property. Well, we could set the condition to be auto shrink equals false, meaning we don't want auto shrink anywhere on any of our servers, so we can enforce that by setting up a condition. And finally, policies are just a set of rules, a set of the conditions that we want to enforce. Policy-based management is really neat stuff. It really is a DBA's dream because it makes it so much easier to manage settings across an instance. And I mean, you can keep it very simple, and just make sure that specific database level settings are never touched or blocked or whatever. And you can get very granular, all the way down to defining a standard for your object names. And Microsoft actually includes a best practices directory full of policies that every SQL Server should have running on them. And I'll show you exactly where that is, how to import and export policies. That's one way to do it. If you have multiple servers that you're managing, you can do the whole import or export policies and move them around. And that's easy if you only manage a few instances of SQL Server. You can get away with doing that and then just have a centralized repository to store all your policies in case you ever bring more online. You can just import them into there and use them. Or you can create a central management server, which I'll also show you how to do, where we can designate one server is where all of our policies live, and then we can push out those policies to all of our registered servers that are registered with our central management server. A great way to do enterprise policy-based management. All right, why don't we head over to the Virtual Nugget Lab? We'll start with how to implement auditing and create instance and database level audits, and then we'll take a look at how to implement policy-based management at the instance level and then across the enterprise. So here we are in the Virtual Nugget Lab. So I pre-launched SQL Server Management Studio from our quick launch menu there, and I opened up the solution for this series. And you can see we have a new project in here called 12-auditing. Let's expand that. And we're going to start with creating server level audits. So I'll get the script up here just so you can see it. We'll go over this after we're familiar with how to do this in the interface. And if you want to set up the actual audit in the interface, you have to go to the Security tab underneath the instance and head down to Audits. And here it is. So you can see this is where we're going to create our targets. So this is going to be just really specifying where we're going to write the audits to. So let's create a server audit. I'm just going to right click and choose New Audit. So here we just give it a name. We can specify a queue delay, meaning it's going to be a second when the operation takes place until it audits exactly what happened. 0 means it's completely synchronous. And the important one here is going to be on audit log failure. What do we do? So a log failure could happen if we're logging to a file and that file's on a network share where the drive is full and it can't write any more data to it. So if that were to happen, what do we do? Continue means it won't do the audit and the database will continue performing normally. So the only reason you'd want to do this is if your database being in an operational state or the server being in an operational state is more important than the audit itself. So if the audit's more important, then you may want to shut down the server or fail operation. Shutdown server will completely shut down the database engine. Fail operation will fail the operation that caused the audit that were to fail. So the audit destination then is really just where do we want this data to go? Do we want to pipe it out to a file? If so, we need to specify the file path, and then we have some optional information about the file or files. And then if we want to log it to security log, we just choose that. If we want to log it to the application log, we just choose that. Now, if we choose to log to the security log, there's a couple of things we need to do in local security policy to make this happen. So let's head into the Start menu, Administrative Tools, and Local Security Policy. So once this fires up, we want to head into Local Policies, User Rights Assignment, and down to Generate Security Audits. So you'll want to add whatever account our SQL services are running under, you want to make sure are in here, so that way SQL can write to the security event log. All right. The other one you want to do is go into Audit Policy and Audit Object Access. Turn success and failure on in here, hit OK, and we're good to go. So with doing that will allow us to write to the security log. So let's hit OK here, and you see that creates the audit, but it creates it and disables it by default. You can right click and choose Enable Audit, and that'll turn it on. So I'm going to delete this and hit OK. And we're going to create 3 of them, one of each type. One for application logging, one for security logging, and one for file logging. You can see we've got a mix of on failures as well. We have one that will fail the operation, one will shut down our security ones, and then our file ones will continue. So I'm going to execute this script, and that'll create all 3 of them. And you notice you have to use the master database to make this happen. If we right click and choose refresh, now we have all 3 of them in here. So let's enable a few of these. Just right click, choose enable audit, and we'll do the same thing for our file log audit here. And let's take a look at how to do this then at the server level, how to create an actual server audit specification. So I'm going to open up our server audit script, and we're going to start by doing this in the interface. So if we right click on server audit specifications and choose new server audit specification, now we can give it a name. We can choose our target, where it's going, which are the audits that we just created. So let's choose app log for this one. So now we can choose what actions we want to monitor. So if you drop down the audit action here, we have a lot of stuff in here. We have backup and restore. So anytime a backup and restore happens, no matter what database it is in, we'll track it. So let's put that one in there. You can see if you add one, we'll get another record here, so you can add as many as you want. And just to go over a few of these, you have the database logout group. That pertains to contained databases. The DBCC group, anytime a DBCC statement is issued across the instance level, it'll get logged. Drop this down again here. And there's lots of them. Anytime a schema changes, anytime permissions change on objects, anytime a successful login occurs or even a failed login occurs, we can track it. So a lot of good things you can track in here. If you want to get help on a specific group and what it does, just hit the help button down here and go into sync it up in the table of contents here and head right up to server audit actions, groups and actions. This will give you a list of every single one of those that we were looking at and a description of what they do, both at the server level and down at the bottom. You can get a list of database level actions. So super useful to know where to find that kind of stuff. But when you're all good, just hit OK. It'll create the server audit in a disabled state. So let me delete this one as well here. And to do this in code, here's the same exact thing here, only I actually added server state change group. So this is anytime the state changes, pause or restarts on a SQL server, it'll track it. So we'll do that, the backup and restore group and the DBCCs group. With state equals on, will automatically turn it on for us when it creates it. And by the way, you can do that up at the audit level too here by issuing an alter server audit with state equals on. So let's do this. Let's run this and hit execute. And you can see that failed because it's not a POG, it's app log. I spelled it wrong there. All right, let's try that one more time. Let's highlight it, hit execute. There we go, that's better. So now if we refresh our server audits, there it is, and it's currently turned on. So how can we test this? Well, we can perform a backup operation. We can run a DBCC. Let's do them both. So we'll start with a backup. We're just going to back up the Nugget Demo DB database that is on this instance to our support files for this specific Nugget. So let's do it. We have it highlighted here. Let's hit execute. And it's running the backup right now, and there we go. So it backed up all of our data files in our log file. We have a lot of data files for this database, so they all got backed up into one single backup file, and that should have been a logged operation because of the audit. There's only one way to find out, and that is to head into the event viewer. So let's go down to Start, Administrative Tools, and up to the event viewer. We'll hit Continue here. Expand the Windows logs. Click on the application log. And in here, if you have a lot of events going on, you want to look for the ones that do not have a task category like this one. Here we go. This is exactly what an audit looks like. It gives us the audit event with the time on it. We get a lot of information about the object ID, the database, the principal, the SPID that did it. And all the way down to the bottom here, you can see the actual statement that we executed, the database that it was executed against, the instance. So it's a full-blown audit with all the information we need to know when it happened and how it happened. Now let's do the same thing with our DBCC statement. We'll run a DBC statement against our Nugget Demo DB here, a check DB on the Nugget Demo DB, which is running a check DB right now. There it is. Everything looks like it panned out okay. So now if we go back to the application log and just refresh it here, we should get another audit. And here it is. And this time we can scroll down and see that it was our DBCC statement. So that's auditing at the server level. Now again, auditing at the server level means that it's going to audit every single database. We can't really get too granular with it because it's an instance level audit. It's going to cover all databases. So if we ran this DBCC on another database, it would still get logged. So if we do want to get granular, we need to create a database level on it, and you'll need Enterprise Edition to do this. So let's do this here at the database level through the interface, and you'll need to navigate to your database. So let's go into AdventureWorks, expand the security node, and you'll see at the bottom here database audit specifications. So what we're going to do is we're going to track statements against the employee table made by members of the DBO group. So let's right click on database audit specification and choose new. Same thing, give it a name, specify where we're going to go to. This time we're going to point it to our log audit, server audit here. And if you drop this down, you'll see a lot of the same stuff you saw at the instance level, backup, restore, except that it applies to the database level. Logouts, changes on objects, DBCCs, but we also get delete, execute, insert, select, and update. So very granular stuff here, and really nice that we can track that kind of activity at the object level. So let's run the code to do this, and I'll take you back in the interface to show you the finished version here. So we're just going to run the code here, and we need to hook it into a database. So let's get our using statement here because we're going to switch to the AdventureWorks database, run the create database audit specification against our file log audit, and we're going to create a select, insert, update, delete. So all four of the DML statements we're going to monitor against the employee table made by the DBO members. And we're also going to, for good measure here, throw on the execute action against any stored procedures, and specifically here this stored procedure also by the DBO group. So let's hit execute, and that'll create it. And now if we refresh our database audits and expand it, there it is. And if we right click and go to properties here, you can see what it did. It created one for each action, and you can see it's against the object name. And if you do this in the interface, choose your action, choose your object name and the principal name. Everything else will get automatically filled in for you. And that's it. So now we can test this one out. And so let's just run a select statement here on the human resources.employee table. We're a member of the DBO group, so if we execute this, it should have written that audit out to our log file. And if we want to look at the log file, let's just navigate to our support files folder here and go into 12-auditing, and there is our log file. All right, so now if we actually want to see the physical data that's in here, we have a couple of ways to do it. We can go back to our server audit and right click on it and choose view audit logs. Here we go. And it's going to be the second one, or actually it is the second one right here. This would be the first one. And this is just audit session change, so it logged any time that we turn this on or off. So here it is. Here is the actual log itself. And let's just give ourselves some room to read here. And if we scroll down, there it is. There's our select statement against our employee object. Now let's do that one more time. Let's execute a stored procedure this time. There's the stored procedure that we're monitoring. And just to show you, you can also read it by running the function get audit file, pass in the path to the directory, and you can use wildcards here to read all of the files because Windows and SQL will generate many files for the log. But if we execute this, there we go. So now we're up to 3. And if we scroll over here, you can see the server principal ID. That's the actual GUID of the individual that did it. But if we scroll over, here it is right here. Here's the one that we just executed, the object name, the statement, and some good information there, what file it sits in, so on and so forth. So you got a couple of ways to read data from a file. You can use the log on the server audit itself or use the function to look at the data. Now something else we can do is turn on logging of connections coming in. So this is an easy way to do it. You just right click on your instance, go to properties, head down to security, and we have login auditing. And by default, failed logins only is turned on, but you can turn on successful logins or both failed and successful logins, and it'll start writing everything to the application event log. So if we hit OK here, and let's just try to log in, we'll choose Database Engine. Let's go ahead and just choose SQL Server Authentication. We'll choose Nugget 04, and I'll type in a bad password here and hit connect. Hey, look at that, login failed. So if we cancel this, head into the event viewer, and let's just refresh it here. And look at the top one, and check it out. Login failed for Nugget 04, password did not match that for the login provided. So that's a great way to monitor failed logins especially, but if you're, again, in a sensitive environment and you want to see who's logging in at all times successful or not, then you can track everything that hits the server as far as logins go. All right, why don't we close out of our auditing scripts, and we'll even hide Solution Explorer here because we're done with our scripting. And let's talk about policy-based management and how to do it. This is really neat stuff. So let's head down to the management node, and you'll see policy management right on top. So here's all the things we were talking about in our slides. We have policies, conditions, and facets. Let's start with facets here because these are all the objects that we can work with. So for instance, take the database for instance. Let's just right click on this and go to properties, and these are all of the properties of the facets that we have access to when we create our conditions, and we're going to then create policies that use those conditions against these properties. So that's really all this screen is for, is to figure out what properties are available on the facet and find out what policies depend on it and what conditions depend on it. So let's hit close here and take a look at conditions, because this is where we're going to spend most of our time, is creating these conditions. So we'll right click on a condition, conditions node, choose new condition, and the first thing we can do here is just give it a name. So let's just say block auto shrink, a popular one to do here. And then we choose our facet that we want to apply this to, and we were just in database, so let's choose database. And now, because we chose database, we have all of the properties of that facet available to us. So what we can do here is choose auto shrink, and now the value we want auto shrink to be is false. So from here, you can add more clauses, so we can build our expression. You can do ands and ors and stuff on here. So all of these will have to evaluate to our values then to pass the condition. Now you can even get really fancy. See the build button over here? You can open this up and write your own expression. At the bottom here, you have a function list, which gives you some information on what the function does and an example. So, I mean, if you want to get super fancy, you can execute your own SQL. Do lookups into tables to figure out what you want the values to be for some of the properties of our facets here. And you can even execute a WEQUAL statement. What's a WEQUAL? Well, it's a way to execute a WMI query to go into Windows to look up Windows information. So again, you can get really, really crazy here if you need to with your facets and your conditions. So I'm going to hit OK here, and you see that'll create the condition. Now we can go into policies, right click, and choose new policy. We can give this policy a name. We'll do the same thing here. Block auto shrink. We can choose our condition. There it is. And then you can choose what targets you want to run this against, and we're going to run this against the database level. You can choose your evaluation mode if you want to run it on demand, meaning we're going to be the ones that are manually controlling the actual evaluation of the policy, or you can put it on a schedule if you want. And then you can choose your server restriction as well. For instance, you can create another condition that evaluates the version of SQL that you're on, and then it'll only apply to those versions. And I'll show you here what Microsoft gives us with some best practice policies, how they do it. So that's it. We can choose OK, and now we have a policy that's again disabled by default. So we're going to delete these, and I'll show you Microsoft's best practice policies that they include here with SQL Server, and we'll analyze how they do it, which will give us a good indication of how we should be doing it. And I'll show you how to import policies. So right-click on the Policies node, choose Import Policy, hit the Browse button, and it'll default right to the location where Microsoft puts them all. And policies are just XML documents here. And if you scroll down, look at them all. There's a ton of them in here. Things like some good ones here, data and log file locations. So if we want to lock people into data and log file locations, like we do, we have specific drives set up for each, so that would be a good one. Here's database auto close, and what do you know? Auto shrink in their best practices as disabled. Pretty funny. So let's grab their auto shrink just to show you here. Choose OK, and we'll hit OK here, and there it is. So they add a little bit more. They have, if we open up their auto shrink, for instance, here we go. I opened it up down here. That looks exactly the same. That's exactly what we just did. No difference there. But they also add an Enterprise or Standard Edition. If we right-click on this and go to Properties, they have an Engine Edition equals Standard or an Engine Edition equals Enterprise or Developer. So what's nice about the value here is depending on the property you choose on the facet, it'll give you a list of available values. So here's all the available values of the current edition of SQL. So that's kind of neat. And then another one, Online User Database. So this is just ensuring that it's not a system object and the status is normal. So ensuring that the database is online when we run the policy to check it, because it needs to be online in order to look at the settings. And then the policy ties it all together. So if we right click and just evaluate here what the policy looks like, you can see these are just all conditions. So the actual check condition is if auto shrink is disabled. The targets are going to be the online user databases, and then the server restriction is going to be what we specified down here for this condition, the enterprise or standard. So it's really just all about creating conditions and then tying them to each part of the policy. So from this point, we could evaluate the policy. You don't need to enable it in order to evaluate it on the current instance. You can just click on evaluate, and it's going to run it against all of the databases on this instance. And everything was successful against all of our databases. We do not have auto shrink turned on anywhere. In fact, if you hit view, you can see the field, the operator, the expected value, and the actual value. Now, what if we go into our Nugget Demo DB, into Properties, into Options, and let's turn auto shrink on to true. Now, if we had this policy turned on, we wouldn't have been able to do that. But it's turned off, and now we could reevaluate the policy, and we're going to get one failure right here. So we could check this, hit apply, and what it'll do then if we click yes is it'll change it for us. Pretty cool stuff. So what about taking this across instances? Well, let's just minimize everything here. And we need to go into our view, registered servers. So in our registered servers, if you expand this, we have what's called central management servers. So what we're going to do is we're just going to right click and register a central management server, and we're going to make eval our central management server. You can hit test here, looks good, save, and now we have one central management server available to us. So from here we can create groups. So we can right click, choose new server group. We can just call this, production servers. Hit OK. And now we can create more groups, and then we can put specific servers into specific groups by right clicking on the server and choosing new server registration. So let's add eval2. Looks good. Let's right click, head to new server registration again, add eval3. That looks good. And why not? Let's add our Express instance as well. And there we go. So we have all of our instances here under production servers. And the reason to group them together is because now you can evaluate policies at the group level, and it'll run them through all of the instances in that group. You can still manage single instances from here too. So if you wanted to evaluate a specific policy on a specific instance, you can just right click on that instance and do so. You can also import policies from here to those instances. And watch this, this is really cool. Let's say that we wanted to import our database auto shrink policy and push it over to all these instances. We can just right click on our group here, choose import policies. Let's browse to that database auto shrink policy. There it is. Hit open, hit OK, and it pushed it all. It pushed them to each instance, and then we can find out here. Let's just switch back to Object Explorer, and let's connect to eval2. Push down management, policies, and check it out. There it is. So that's really neat stuff that we can do that. And in fact, let's evaluate a policy across all these instances. So I'm going to right click, choose evaluate policy, And the only thing we really need to do here is choose our source. So we can browse to a policy file, or we can grab a policy off an existing instance. So I'm just going to choose our eval instance for just to show you here, and this will give us all the policies on that instance. Let's choose database auto shrink, hit evaluate, and now it's going to run through all the databases on all of these instances. And we only have AdventureWorks 2012, one database on each SQL eval 3 and eval 2, as you can see here. And you can view the details of each one. All looks good. Now you'll notice that our SQL Express instance, no targets were found. And if you remember, if we go back to Object Explorer here and look at the actual policy, we have our server restriction to Enterprise or Standard Edition. So that's why when we evaluated our policies, SQL Express was ignored. So really neat stuff. And by the way, if you push over those policies to your other instances and enable them, they'll be live on those instances as well. So nobody will ever be able to change auto shrink as long as those policies are active. So policies are again kind of a DBA's dream because it just makes managing multiple instances, settings, and enforcing standards across your enterprise and across your SQL servers that much easier. And as an added bonus, it's really easy to work with, easy to learn, easy to set up, configure, and manage, and it's a lot of fun too. In this CBT Nugget, we got familiar with auditing SQL Server. We started off with an overview of what auditing is all about. So from the actual auditing perspective, we saw that we create server audits, which are really just targets, where we're going to log this audit information to. And then we can create instance and database level audits that we specify actions that we want to monitor, and those actions will be written out to the specified target that we chose when we set up the server audit. We then got familiar with policy-based management and saw that it's great for enforcing configuration standards across your instances. Then we got over the Virtual Nugget Lab, showed you here how to create server audits, how to set up server audit specifications, database audit specifications. We wrote it to the event log, we wrote it to the log file, and at the end here we took a good look here at policy-based management, how to set up conditions, how to set up policies, how to use Microsoft's best practices to import existing policies. And by the way, you can export policies just as easily. And then we took a look at how to set up a central management server so we can manage our policies and evaluate and enforce our policies across the enterprise. I hope this has been informative for you, and I thank you for viewing.